Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during breaks. Audio streaming of today's council meeting starts at 1 p.m. local time. Streaming is paused during...
Somebody's going to flick the switch for us.
Yes, we've just gone live.
Gone live. Thank you. Well, welcome to our council meeting for the 25th of June. And we have one apology, and that apology is Councillor Soward. We'll go to declaration of interest. Any declaration of interest from the councillors? No? Confirmation of minutes. Somebody happy to move the minutes of the 11th of June meeting?
Happy to move, Mayor.
Councillor Spencer and seconded Deputy Mayor. All those in favour say aye.
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 Any against? So the ayes have it. There's no community reports. So the public questions on notice are there. Then questions without notice. We have 3. Leanne, you're going to read those out?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Question 1 from Ray Norman of Trevallyn. Given that Council has determined to lease ex-Show Society land to UTAS to be repurposed as a car park, and that this car park is intended to be primarily used by UTAS for purposes UTAS determines, and over the long term, and given that it can be expected that there will be significant ongoing and recurrent costs involved as a consequence of this usage to do with surface maintenance, repair and restoration of any consequent damage or vandalism, line marking, lighting, the provision of meters and other costs anticipated and unanticipated, will Council formally levy UTAS an appropriate cost recovery levy that will be reviewed annually to fully reflect the actual upkeep costs to ensure that none of these costs, anticipated or unanticipated, ultimately impact in any way upon ratepayers and their rate demands?
Thank you. There is no intention to impose a recovery levy. On the 19th of March 2020, Council determined that it would be responsible for the reasonable maintenance of the car parks during the lease period. The cost of such maintenance will be factored into the current negotiations in respect to the lease arrangements between UTAS and the Council. This will also be offset by the revenue received from Council's share of the car parking spaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Question 2 from Mr. Norman. Given that currently the City of Launceston Council is the QVMAG's governing body and therefore the institution's default trustees and by implication the determiners QVMAG collections policies relative to collection material that has immense research importance, significance and value, albeit that as a consequence of past practices that would not or could not or do not meet current best practice museum standards, and that much of the collection remains unaccessioned and possibly unregistered, but are nonetheless of particular importance and significance to a vast range of researchers, will Council make all collection records available to researchers as a matter of policy, and likewise ensure that irrespective of the state of record keeping, determine that accession and registration documentation, such as it is, and primary data held in trust, such as it is, remains unedited and unaltered in any way and freely available given the public ownerships invested in all collection documentation?
Thank you. Queen Victoria Museum and Art Gallery staff work hard to fulfil requests from researchers. Primary registration documents are not available to the public. They generally contain little, if any, cultural information and as such, are not considered research documents. When the QVMAG collections audit is completed, the information available to the public will be freely available on our website. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Question 3 from Mr. Norman. Given that Council currently and is increasingly engaged in and involved in enduring publication across a broad spectrum that includes printed hard copy, digital presentations, online publications, video presentations, etc., there is a growing and increasing need to acknowledge the work and or other contributions of cultural producers and their facilitators, including the use of their work to be acknowledged. Will Council initiate an acknowledgement policy and put in place the consequent acknowledgement protocols to ensure that all cultural producers, artists, designers, photographers, videographers, project producers, technology provider various are both acknowledged and appropriately rewarded, and moreover seek the formal permission of all people who are used and or employed or used as subjects in such publications, presentations and productions, irrespective of their employment status?
Thank you. This is a complex issue for any organisation as it involves ethical and moral rights, as well as law around intellectual property, copyright and personal information. We are committed to meeting our obligations under the Australian and state legislation. We have no plans to develop an acknowledgement policy at this time. Thank you. Any further questions?
That's all. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Leanne. We now move on to, under the provision of the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act 1993, Council acts as a planning authority in regard to the items included in agenda item 9, the planning authority, which is 9.1. Now under 9.1, we have no speakers for 9.1. No matters. Is somebody happy to move 9.1?
Happy to move.
Councillor Spencer, and seconded Councillor Finlay. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor Spencer?
Thanks.
Councillor Finlay?
No, thank you, Mayor.
Any other councillor wish to speak to the item? 9.1. There's no hands up. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please say aye.
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 Any against? So that is carried by all. Thank you. Then move on to council reports. Councillor reports. Any councillor reports? Councillor Dawkins.
Thank you. I'd just like to make a statement today about a $10 million regional art fund that has been released through the Tasmanian portion through Rant Arts. So for anybody listening who's in the arts ecosystem, please look at the Rant Arts page, because there's relief, recovery and renewal programs available, and I know the federal government have announced other funding today as well. So for a sector that has really suffered during the pandemic, there is help on the way. I think you've just got to know where to access it.
Thank you for that. Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. I have two items today. The first is an extension of an item listed under your report. I just wanted to acknowledge the wonderful welcome that acknowledged the reopening of the QV Mag at Inveresk Monday week ago. It was just fabulous to have Auntie Patsy Cameron and Dave Goff there from the Tasmanian Aboriginal community to undertake and lead a traditional welcome and to, I guess, be a beacon. And it's lovely to be following Councillor Dawkins' report, to be a beacon to show that the arts are beginning to re-emerge here in northern Tasmania. So to have the QV Mag open for business again is just wonderful, and we know that the Royal Park site is set to be opened from July. So I wanted to acknowledge the work of GM Tracy and her team for a really wonderful reopening of the QV Mag. And the second item I wanted to share today was that YAG, the Youth Action Group, held their final meeting with the Council's Youth Development Officer, Claudia, last week, as Claudia sets off on her own youth development mission, which is very exciting, her and Max welcoming a new baby. It was just wonderful to see the regard that the members of YAG have for Claudia, not only this year's cohort, but indeed those over the years that she's worked so closely with. The ability to create events to engender pride and skills and confidence, but most importantly, that ability to develop resilience in young people. And I think that the work that our council, through that youth development role, have been able to undertake under Claudia's leadership is regarded so very well amongst her peers in the youth sector. And we'll miss her for the next 12 months. But on behalf of all of those young people, they wanted to pass on an acknowledgement for the work and the care and love that she has for them. So I thought that was worthy of sharing today.
Thank you for that, Deputy. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd just like to endorse the comments made about Claudia by Councillor Gibson. I think she's done a wonderful job and she will be missed, but hopefully her journey into her next chapter in her life will be just as exciting, if not more so. Just wanted to acknowledge, I guess some of our committees are up and working again now. We've sort of been in a hiatus during the COVID period, but the Heritage Advisory Council met last week. So I just wanted people to be aware that was looking at the various activities going on in the heritage world again, and the number of things have been discussed. I guess there are a number of heritage-related activities that the council have been dealing with, and they were discussed and will come out with some minutes in the next little while. Also noting that we're still endeavouring to organise our photo competition that we had in place prior to COVID. So we're hoping we're going to inject something back into the community, but we're just waiting for our subcommittee to come back and work out how we might do that. The second one I just wanted to note also is that during this period, even though there's been no activity within the facility by way of performances, the Princess Theatre and the Theatre North committee have been working regularly, and I just want to take my hat off to the work that Mandy and her team have been doing just to sort of work through a very difficult time in the arts. And we are working on as many scenarios that we can to try and get some activity back into both of our theatres as soon as possible. Obviously determined by social distancing rules and things like that, which I guess this week will help a little bit. So we've got a very sort of working forward program to sort of make sure as soon as we have the ability to sort of open the doors and allow people in, then we'll be doing so. I think there's a meeting next week with many of our art-related organisations that work through the Princess Theatre and the Earl Arts Centre next week to sort of give them a progress report and to sort of see how they're travelling through the process. But I just kind of can't take my head off enough to the work that they're doing in difficult circumstances.
Thank you. Councillor Harris?
Yep, got to remember to unmute. Yes, helps. Last Monday, week ago, I sat in on a meeting of the Tasmanian Active Living Coalition, which was a statewide meeting of people interested in the active living aspect. And as a result of that, there was a request for any proposals to be made to the Premier's Health and Wellbeing Advisory Council August meeting to perhaps access funds in the post-COVID-19 pandemic era to encourage active living. So there has been a pro forma which has been created, and any ideas and projects of any size have to sort of fit through the template, I guess, and they're looking for those proposals to be completed by the end of June, which is only next week. So that's my report for this one.
Thank you very much. That's all I have. Any other councillors? We move on to questions by councillors. Hello. No hands up. Oh, Councillor Spencer.
Thanks, Mayor. Just want to bring up when we put contracts out or we price jobs up, if we can have a fixed price. We're going over budget too much on some of these jobs that we've done. What we need is a fixed price. Fair enough if the footings can be have a different price on them, but once you get out of the ground, it should be a fixed price. You know, I do a lot of quotes. It's always a fixed price. Changes, you do get extra for, but you know, I think we've got to start putting that in our tender process, and so we've got a fixed price.
Thank you. CEO, do you wish to comment?
Look, Mayor, it's one to take under advisement in the sense, obviously, we've got multiple ways in terms of how we deal with different contracts, and the fixed price is certainly an option. But if you leave it with me, I'll come back to you with a response.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McKenzie. You're muted.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I just had a phone call during the week in regards to an elderly gentleman who lives in the northern suburbs who had his rubbish missed as a result of, I think, the change of contractors, and therefore the day that his rubbish was collected was changed. He rang the council to find out why, and he was advised that there had been a change because of the change of contractors. And then advised that the way that he would have found that out would have been by reading the internet. He doesn't have a computer, so I guess just making sure, I just ask a question as to reviewing our policies in regards to letting our ratepayers know where there are significant changes, just to ensure that those people who don't have computer access are still going to be informed on it. I think it's all been sorted now, but that was his concern, is that he doesn't have a computer, and unless somebody writes to him, he doesn't know about that. So it's just, I think in this world that we're in, it's just challenging to get the right medium for everything. So my question is just, can we take that on notice?
Well, I can answer that, Mayor, if you like.
Yes, Shane.
In terms of the gentleman you're referring to, it was a change in time during the day, not a change of days. And anyone that had a change in days actually gets letterbox dropped to make sure they're aware of that.
Okay, thanks, Shane.
Well cleared up. Thank you. No other hands up? No one else have a question?
I do, Mayor.
Councillor.
It's Karina.
Stosenchek, I was going to say. Welcome. Yes, I can. Fire away, Councillor Stosenchek.
Okay. Just a question to the CEO. I'm just checking if you're aware of the recent payout for the Roundup class action in America, and whether if we are aware of that, whether we have any plans to review our own use of Roundup in council.
Yeah, so we've had this matter raised with us previously, and certainly our workplace health and safety requirements are very clear in respect of its usage. I'd need to refresh my memory in terms of the latest position with respect to that, but certainly it's been raised through internally, but also through the union as well. So I'll get a response to councillors on that particular matter, because yeah, we're aware that it's obviously one that we watch fairly closely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
No further questions. We'll move on to 14.1, Council Workshop Report. Somebody happy to move that?
Mayor, I'm happy to move.
Deputy Mayor, thank you.
I'd just like to move it with one correction to the actual report. That we didn't in fact discuss the Newnham master plan. It was just an update with regard to QV Mag, an update with regard to UTAS and the new precinct.
Yep. Correct. So, and Councillor Mackenzie was seconding that?
I'm happy to second with that amendment.
Thank you. All those, any discussion, Deputy Mayor, further discussion?
No, thank you.
Councillor Mackenzie?
No.
Any other councillor wish to speak to it? I'll put the motion. Those in favour, please say yes or aye.
Aye.
Any against? No one's against, so that is carried. Thank you. We move on to 18.1, and I've been told Councillor Dawkins is very keen.
Thank you.
Yes, he's waving to me. Councillor Dawkins moves. Is there a seconder?
Mayor, we have some speakers to this item.
Oh, we do too. Oh, thank you for reminding me. Well done. We have a couple of speakers, so their statements will be read out. So, Leanne, are you doing that?
Kelsey will do that today.
Kelsey will. Thank you.
Good morning. So the first submission is from Trish Hausler from Plastic Free Launceston. Dear Mayor and Councillors, Plastic Free Launceston wishes to express support for the agenda item 18.1, Policy for Phasing Out Single-Use Plastics on council-managed, owned land and council-sponsored events. Plastic Free Launceston believes that the time is right to make decisive steps towards addressing the problem of single-use plastics, with a policy to phase out single-use plastics on council-managed and owned land and council-sponsored events. Such a policy demonstrates the Council's understanding of the extent of plastic pollution problem and the unsustainable practices that encourage the single use of a plastic item with its embedded resources and energy simply to be used once, discarded, and then additional resources and energy needed to deal with it as a waste, needed to deal with it as a waste, unfortunately ending up in landfill. The Tama Estuary Kanamaluka links our land-based settlements directly with the marine environments, and therefore it is also a direct pathway for plastic pollutants to enter marine ecosystems where they cause the starvation of species due to the ingestion of large amounts of plastic, threats to the marine life ingesting the plastics that absorb and bioaccumulate toxic chemicals such as PCBs, DDT and PBDEs, entanglement and injury to marine animals, and threats to vital marine food chains. Increasingly, local authorities have had to bear the cost of cleaning up plastic litter, maintaining litter traps and bins, etc. Local community clean-up groups such as Clean Up Local, Catch It in the Catchment, and the Sea Shepherd contribute to clean-up days at which plastics dominate the litter collected. Plastic Free Launceston strongly urges councillors to fully support this policy, and in doing so signal our community that steps are being taken to decrease unnecessary plastic use. Behavioural changes in our community need prompting and this is a very good start. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we have one more from Malcolm Cohen, I believe.
Yes, so Mr. Cohen says, I wish to congratulate the councillors and staff for the initiative in developing this policy, and particularly Councillor Dawkins for initiating the investigation that has led to this policy. By passing and implementing this policy, the City of Launceston will be sending a message to the wider community that the continuing pollution of our land and waterways is no longer acceptable. We must take positive action to reverse the use of so-called convenient packaging. This convenience only applies to the initial user. It provides only a private benefit and does not include the public cost of disposing the waste or the environmental cost of the escape of plastics into the environment, particularly waterways. This is apart from the waste of limited resources consumed in the production and distribution of single-use plastics. I've recently seen the problem that the council has in managing single-use plastic at the refuse site and the amount of plastic that can easily enter our waterways. We need to take responsibility for this problem as a community. It is not solely a problem for council. Hopefully this is a first stage in banning of single-use plastics across the city and eventually further. Already many businesses are seeing the point of difference in using recyclable and compostable products. Harvest Market has been plastic free for some time, proving the concept. Unfortunately, some businesses will need to be forced by regulation to comply, and it's unfortunate that some of the worst offenders are national and internationally franchised businesses. I urge you to pass this motion and to see it as a starting point, not a conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all the statements to be read, I understand. So 18.1, we have moved Councillor Dawkins and seconded Councillor Walker, I understand. Is that right, Councillor Walker, with your hand up?
Correct.
Thank you. So, Councillor Dawkins, you wish to speak to it?
I do. And as always, it's not very, you don't have to go very far to find new examples of how plastic is polluting our environment. Just today, scientists have acknowledged that they've discovered microplastics found in the gut of very small invertebrates which only live in Antarctic soil. So that just goes to show how far microplastics have travelled on the planet, and I don't believe we have any idea really what the ramifications of this are going to be. So in agreement with the previous speaker, this has to just be the beginning of us phasing out single-use plastics. But during this process from the original motion to today, we now have an understanding at Council of all of the requirements that we need to be able to move forward. So we understand the definition, we understand how that relates to how other LGAs and other parts of the world have defined single-use plastics, what's in, what's out, things like straws, of course, but how we can quarantine, I guess, if you look at a vending machine, for example, that's something that it's very, very hard for us to control what's in the vending machine, and single-use plastic bottles will be quarantined from this policy. So this is the beginning point. This is absolutely vital that our community are on board, and this is why the phase out is really, really important. And I know I've talked about it before and I don't need to go over it again, but this is a transition, and during this transition we can champion the leaders in the community who have already made that step. We can get to some of the complexity and some of the depth of what we need to understand. For example, that the bioplastics that will be replacing single-use plastics in many instances, they need to be heated to 50 degrees, I believe, to be able to be compostable. So if we put those into recycling, we can contaminate recycling. If we put them into landfill, they can still take many decades to break down. So we have to now start getting very, very particular about how we use our waste and where our waste goes. We are set up for this. As we've discussed before, FOGO is such an incredible opportunity for Launceston to be able to keep moving in this space. I would like to thank the work of Michelle Ogulin and for Mick Attard. They have worked tirelessly to ensure that no stones left unturned as far as council policies which overlap this policy are concerned. We are well positioned to be community leaders in Tasmania and to show other LGAs exactly what's required to bring in a policy which has buy-in from the community, which relates to not only, excuse me, my dog needs my attention at the moment.
I can see that.
I've got a neighbour's cat stuck in my tree and my dogs are very, very upset about it. I've lost my train of thought. So having a facility like the Aurora Stadium involved in this, this is really incredible work because there are so few places in Australia that have put the kind of requirements that this policy will put on the stadium. There's a lot of plastic coming through football games, and I hope, as many of you do, that next year that stadium will be full again of people enjoying themselves watching the football and sustainably using bioplastic to be able to enjoy a beer if that's what they want to do. So I hope you will support this. I have no reason to believe that you won't. I want to thank the work of Trish Hausler from Plastic Free Launceston. She was the one who came to me and said, you can do this, and I think together we can.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dawkins. Councillor Mackenzie's got a question, I understand. You're muted.
I will unmute somehow.
No, he's still muted.
Yeah, now I'm back. Sorry, I'm having difficulty unmuting. Look, my question was really in light, I mean, again, I'd like to speak to it in my turn as well, when my turn turns up. I just noticed under the scope, the policy applies to council leases where the lessee is operating a takeaway food and or beverage service. Then in the report, it talks about the Gorge restaurant, which I know has a takeaway element to it as well. My first question is really relating to why we haven't expanded it to council leases, noting that we, like bowls clubs and places like that, noting that we're seeking to insert a clause into the lease agreements. And if there's a reason for that, I guess at the very least, we as council write to all of the activities in our council leased properties to encourage them to undertake the plastic-free stance that we're taking with the takeaway procedures. But just interested to note why we're not expanding it to other facilities that we own and lease.
Thank you. Shane, are you answering that, or is Michael about? I'm not sure who's.
I can answer it unless Michelle Ogulin would like to.
No, I'm happy to just provide a bit of background. So we did look in depth at all the leases, and I think there are about 109 or 110 leases. I can't recall off the top of my head. I think with relation to sports clubs and bowls clubs, the issue became then an issue of compliance. So how do we actually get those sports clubs to actually do what we need them to do? How do we check on that? So I think the easiest starting point was to look at those cafes that we have a lease with that actually are food service businesses that we can go in and inspect easier, but it's not to preclude those other sports groups coming in the future. It was just really a matter of resourcing to do it.
Yeah. So would we, in the first instance, then, Michelle, then seek to at least write to them and note the policy that we're invoking and encourage them to actually fulfil the obligations that we're asking those through the mandatory process, on a voluntary basis?
Yes, and I believe that was the intent of it. Sorry, forgive me, I've moved into a different role at council, so I haven't looked at the paper that closely recently, but when I was writing it, the intent was to then contact all of those other organisations to let them know of this policy and to give them support and education to help them move along that journey to compostable or reusable products. So it's not about excluding them, but it was, yes, certainly going down that voluntary path and educating them.
Well done.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mayor. And I thank Councillor Hugh Mackenzie for that question, because it kind of leads onto from where I'm starting, which is, of course, this is an evolving story. For years, probably everyone listening today has thought, that this this problem, this scourge of plastic pollution, rubbish, is something that we have to address, and yet it's been something that's been very difficult to address, because it is comes from, as one of the contributors said, multinational companies, policies that are far bigger than council, and that sort of thing. And of course, I'm presuming that it will get unanimous support today, because it's not just a green matter. It's something that affects everybody, something that everyone has concerns about. But we have to start, and we are starting, and we are being the change by making that start, which benefits everyone. There might be some resistance somewhere, but I'm extremely happy and wish to thank the work of Michelle and of Mick Attard as well, because it's no doubt there are going to be examples where it will be difficult, as Councillor Mackenzie has alluded to, but there'll be other areas where we will get enthusiastic support, where businesses have already made major steps themselves in this direction. Of course, it's our natural world that benefits, but it's us as well. It's our environment. It's the beautification of our town. It's the livability of our city. And it's not just the cost to environment, but it's the cost to council when these things are not recycled, when these things are just simply put through the waste system and end up becoming landfill. So there's a cost benefit, of course, to the environment, but also to council. And I'd like to think that long term, there is, obviously opportunities for financial benefit because of that. And there are opportunities for savings and opportunities to pass on some of those savings to our community. When people go above and beyond the call of duty in this regard and really contribute on a business level, I'd like to think that the council could help to incentivise that process further. As I started by saying, it's an evolving story. There's things like that fall into difficult categories, like cigarette butts. We've all walked along the street and seen cigarette butts in the gutter. It might not, for some people, they might not think it's a big deal, but unfortunately, this is a huge problem in our waterways. And if these cigarette butts are in the gutter, you can guarantee that some of them are going to make it their way to the mighty Canamuka River. So there's lots more work to be done. But I'll finish, and I will thank also Trish Hausler for the work that she does with Plastic Free Launceston. But I will finish by saying what I started to begin with. It's an evolving.
You're disappearing, Councillor Walker. You're can't hear you. So I assume you're finished now. Then you've gone off air. Yep. Okay, Councillor Walker, we'll leave it there with you. Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, I think this is a journey we've been going on for some time. I think that we'd be disingenuous if we didn't support this motion today on the basis of the fact that we've signed up to a climate emergency, we've signed up to power plans and all sorts of different things that we are trying to do to make ourselves a much more renewable city. And probably in the past, I'd have come from a cost point of view and say what cost of business and things like that. And I still have some empathy with that. But this is a subject that I think has been out in the community for quite some time. And I guess the businesses should have been seeing this coming for quite some time and need to start to modify their behaviour. I must admit, as I walk around the city in various places and you see the plastic in the waterways, you see the plastic blowing around the streets, it's a pretty unsightly thing, and the issue is it doesn't break down. So I think for our better world, and I guess to sort of fulfil some of the requirements under our climate emergency statement, this, in my view, is a complete no-brainer. As I say, I would like to see this policy now being used to encourage others who may not need to do it in a mandatory sense to start to review this on the basis that it's that day is coming where we will all be moving away from those plastics. I appreciate in some businesses that's challenging, but it's now's the time to start that planning for the future, rather than waiting for somebody to come along and say this is not going to happen and you're not going to be able to do it tomorrow and then start complaining about it then. So I think that provided we're now setting a very strong tone in the direction we wish to go in relation to this, I think anybody who's listening out there, and hopefully if the Examiner report this tomorrow, that people will see that this is probably the future of where we're going with plastics, and that they need to start to take control of their own destiny by doing some of those things now.
Thank you. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Mayor. And if I can start with a question, in the policy component, it says under item 7 that the council will stipulate that the public bars at UTAS Stadium will no longer be able to use disposable alcoholic beverage packaging. And then further on in the report, it talks about the need for the operator of the bars to use a deposit scheme on a renewable plastic or perhaps glass container to get your beer or drink in. My concern is that, as
you've got a question
said,
first?
My question is this. Yeah, coming to it. The question is, Councillor Dawkins talked about compostable clear plastic cups, which I think are great, and I've used them at public events, and they do compost down. But this policy seems to stop that as a potential use within the facility. You have to have a renewable heavy duty plastic, if you like, or glass container that you're going to pay a deposit on. So I'm just thinking that I just want to understand, how does the policy work into the report? Because we seem to have an answer to this question that we should be encouraging, which is using compostable cups. We just need to put compostable bins so that they don't get mixed up with the normal recycling or the rubbish.
Thank you. We'll let someone answer it if that's a question then. Shane, can you answer that? Or?
Well, yes, I can. The policy requires that the single-use plastics go. I guess the report just reflects discussions that have happened to date with UTAS Stadium and what that likely looks like. Of course, with this, it's one thing to ban single-use plastics. The challenge is actually collecting that waste stream and getting it composted. But the policy is for the cease usage of the single-use plastics, and so they do have the choice between compostable and reusable.
Thank you. Did you wish to speak to it, Councillor Harris, still?
Yeah, look, I will just say, if that's the case, that the operator can use compostable clear plastic cups for the use in the bars, then I think that's an excellent outcome, because that's what we clearly need to have happen. It will encourage people to use that in other events as well, and it will also educate the users to then look for the compostable bin, the FOGO bin if you like, rather than putting in the rubbish or the recycling. It does then bring about the need for council to consider the perhaps the provision of a third bin in public spaces where there is a lot of food outlets. If this is going to be the case, we often have the problem of which bin do we put our current eco coffee cup and lid in when we're faced with a landfill or a recycling bin in front of us. So I think it's excellent for us to move to this way, as the other speakers have already said, but I just did have a question on whether the policy would preclude us from using the compostable clear plastic cups that are made from a plant derivative rather than an oil-based derivative. So hence that's why they're eco-friendly. With that, I'll say awesome.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to first of all start by acknowledging the work of Councillor Dawkins in getting us to this point, and obviously now extended by the work of our staff to see us with the draft policy. I think from my perspective, the thing is that this is not an imposition on users and event organisers, but simply the new way forward, and the new way forward that perhaps should have been commenced a number of years ago. I think the objectives are clear, they're not esoteric, they're easily relatable, and I think the lead-in time means that people have time to organise themselves ahead of time. It's like when you sit down with someone a year ago at a meeting and tell them something's going to happen, you need to make changes. That's the case with event organisers and users that are listed in the scope. I have to say I'm a little disappointed that the Princess Theatre wasn't listed explicitly, but certainly I know that that is the intent as that lease falls due, to ensure that one of our flagships that's selling, you know, drinks by the plenty up to 1,000 patrons per performance is able to comply as well. And I want to say, as the chair of the Council's Events Committee, I think what's really important is that really good, nimble conversations happen from the environmental health and sustainability team to the placemaking team, because with the exception of some absolute leaders in this area, what event organisers need is they need clear examples, they need clear direction, and they need mentoring and help. And, you know, a Q&A sheet is great, but the opportunity to actually hear from leading event organisers as to how they've done it, how they've implemented it, and how they've made it work, and we have some of them right here in Launceston who are doing great things in that space, is what is needed. And probably, Mayor, it's not needed in late 2021 or indeed in 2022. Now is the opportunity to actually work with event organisers. In some instances, event organisers have a little, dare I say, lull at the moment where they're redefining their event and looking at what the next incarnation of their event may look like. So here would be an opportunity to even bring some of them into the council, to have a workshop, to have a meeting when social restrictions allow, to actually share the knowledge that we have within the organisation about how they can lead and how they can learn from examples in our municipality and other municipalities as to how that they can do better, and how indeed that by 2022 they can comply. So I note on page 23, it says the council will, after 2022, work with event holders to transition to more sustainable event management. But I think that means that by 2022. Because what is needed now in 2020 and 2021 is that ability to work really closely with our event organisers to create perhaps a virtual team or a nimble team from different parts of our organisation to help event organisers on the journey. And they do need help. They won't be, and as one myself, we won't be at all afraid at asking for help and guidance in this space, because we want to make our events innovative and responsive to this direction that our community is leading us to.
Thank you. Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mayor. Love following the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Gibson, because I think what's important about this policy is that it's being implemented as we've led through this process. We're leading by going first with the land or events or leaseholders that we can manage and partner with. And I think that's been really important, that we can show the way, and as Councillor Gibson said, that we can work through what challenges or concerns there might be and go early to support people to make this change over time. So congratulations to Councillor Dawkins, to the team, Michelle and Mick. It's great work and the beginning of a good process.
Thank you. Councillor Dakin.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm off mute. Yep.
You are.
Look, I'd seriously like to commend Councillor Dawkins, to Trish, again to Mick and to Michelle. You guys are rock stars in this industry, and you make our council look fantastic with the work you do up there at the transfer station. We all know this is the future, and we all know this is the right thing to do. I suppose if we really think about it, it's actually not that hard to do. If I say 2 words, lead paint, that's no longer here. I mean, I see the hardest step obviously is always the first one, but unlike many complex issues, we have an end in sight with this single-use plastic phase out. It's achievable, and it's actually not that far away. In regards, I suppose, to local businesses, they're already on board. Our customers are actually the market regulator when it comes to using these products or not using these products. And as just supposed to answer Councillor, the Deputy Mayor, it's getting easier and easier. With finding replacement products on the market, they're getting created every day, and actually they're far superior than the plastics that we're currently using. Just as an example, with some that we use, I think we pay 10 cents extra per item, but we've never had a complaint about how the food's been presented or, has it been hot or cold. It's always been spot on. I look back and see the plastic straw campaign that I think was 18 months ago and how successful that was from a social movement point of view. And you struggle to find plastic straws now in pubs, bars, restaurants, cafes. An idea, I suppose, could be, I'd flag it for the future, that we could look to provide incentives for businesses moving forward in the years to come in relation to them phasing out and not using single-use plastics. We could possibly provide discounts on their food licences. We could encourage potentially landlords and incentivise them so that they can then incentivise their tenants. But I think this is a fantastic motion. It is exactly where we're headed, and I'm very, very happy to be on board and be part of a council that's going to be leading the way.
Thank you, Councillor Dakin. Councillor Finlay, is that another question, or you still got your hand up from last time? Councillor Dakin?
Apologies.
No, you're on. Any other councillor wish to speak?
Yes, it's Karina.
Councillor Stosnicek, yes.
I just wanted to offer my wholehearted support for this motion. Firstly, once again, thanking Councillor Dawkins for her passion and vision in this area, and for the officers and the work they've done in this space. I don't need to restate all of the reasons for this, as it seems quite obvious to me, the necessity for this move. I just wanted to add that it's particularly important at the moment and very timely, as with the recent COVID restrictions. I think our use of single-use plastics has crept up again, which was understandable, but I think it's a timely reminder that we need to at least be looking at the compostable options. Also, as a member of the Events and Sponsorship Committee, as Councillor Gibson said, I feel it's particularly important for event organisers to make this change. I feel really frustrated whenever I go to events and I see the waste of plastic at these events, that may only run once a year. So, in summary, I look forward to seeing this excellent initiative being put in place and the positive impact that it will have on our community and the environment. Thank you.
Thank you. We have no other speakers unless there's Councillor Spencer. Yeah.
Yeah. I will be supporting this today. I actually went next to the tip with the neighbour about 3 to 4 months ago, and I can see the problem with the plastics. It's blowing into other people's properties. It's on the tip face, and 80% of it is actually plastic. So I think this could make a massive difference to our tip face. So I will support it. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no further speakers, Councillor Dawkins, you wish to close?
I do, thank you. Well, following on from Councillor Spencer, of course, it's an enormous problem at the tip face. There's waterways, very close to that of course are being contaminated by plastic blowing into it and going into deeper waterways. So this is the beginning of this. This is the first step in what could really set City of Launceston on the map for sustainability. We have our strategy, we have our city's power partnership, we're looking at divestment, we're looking at a carbon audit, and now this next step will lead us to a complete phase out of single-use plastics in the LGA. We can follow on from City of Hobart, we can learn from them, and I'd like to foreshadow, it's my intention, if this is successful today, that by the end of the year I'll bring another motion to the council table where we will consider the full phase out. So congratulations to everybody involved. Thank you all for your wholehearted support so far. It's really lovely to be a part of something that gets this kind of support. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. Those in favour, say yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Yes. Any against? Oh, there's a dog against. No, any against? No against. So that is carried unanimously by all. Present, 11 of us. So we go on to 18.2, concessional entry to council's waste.
So moved.
Deputy Mayor moved and seconded.
Happy to second that, Mayor.
Councillor Finlay, thank you. You wish to speak to it, Deputy Mayor?
Look, just briefly to say that this is obviously the 11th year that Council has been offering their concessional entry to our waste disposal facilities. And I think what is nice about this following the previous item is to see that the budget allocation for this particular community initiative has decreased, and it's decreased year on year, and it's decreased because the tests and the requirements are such that people have had to develop new innovative ways of working with their waste streams and diverting it from landfill. And importantly, under the current leadership of the team that are administering this particular community grant, groups, organisations, not-for-profit groups have had to demonstrate through a waste management plan and through a commitment to improved practices that they will in fact make conscious efforts to reduce what it is that has been previously sent to the tip face. You'll note that there is an allocation of $34,171,000 that has been prepared and meets the requirements of the grant, and that a budget amendment will need to follow for close to $4,000. And I think that was just an administrative matter that saw a reduction in the budget line occur without necessarily staff being made aware of it at the time that the items were assessed. Importantly, and Councillor Walker was also part of this assessment together with staff, importantly, over the years, the 8 years that I've been assessing this particular concessional entry to facilities against the policy, we've really strengthened the policy. And I think all of these things working hand in hand with our commitment to improving sustainability and reducing waste going to landfill, gives us, I guess, a sense of pride of what's happening in this space within our organisation. I want to point out, as I've done before, that this is yet another of the very many varied ways that this council supports community and supports community organisations and supports the work of community organisations within our municipality, and that indeed $30,000 to $34,000 is not an insignificant amount. You'll note that whilst, of course, the breadth and depth of organisations listed is quite diverse, they are all organisations that are doing good in our community. Many of them we have other relationships with in form of grants or in the form of other contracts and the like. But one day there will be an amazing part on our portal on the website that will list the huge range of things that we fund and make provision for in our budget that support community. Often people are quick to judge the council and say there isn't a lot in the budget or there isn't a lot the council does for me. I would argue today the $34,000 amount that is put before you supports a great deal of organisations works within our municipality, and so would recommend it to you.
Thank you, Deputy. Councillor Finlay.
I love that. Councillor Gibson should be pleased. I love what he said, but also he should be pleased because he's very much led the improvements through this process in terms of the recognition of the granting to the different organisations and the robustness in the process as well. I think it's really important that we do highlight the way that we are providing this benefit to these great organisations in the community. It's an important part of our overall grants process, but also an important part of our resource management process.
Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, and I will also reiterate that Councillor Deputy Mayor's comments I wholeheartedly endorse, and I certainly appreciate his knowledge and experience on that council. It was the first time I'd sort of sat with him on that, and it was a bit of an eye-opener. The work that our recycling and waste people do in this area, and the thoroughness with which that they assess these applications, and the encouragement that's built in for these groups to reduce the waste that they do produce. It's very encouraging, and it does go very neatly with the policy that we've just passed in regards to reducing single-use plastics. It's not dissimilar in many ways. I certainly can see that there is, room for these groups to be more creative in their approach, to perhaps work together sometimes, where one community organisation is better at another at being able to recycle some of these products or waste products, but at the same time it leads towards the greatest sustainability of our city, and this is areas that I'm sustainable and officers are more than aware of. It would go towards other industries, other endeavours, such as our building industry, where of course there is a lot of waste that's produced. So onward and upward as far as Launceston City goes in terms of addressing these issues. But certainly I echo the comments of the Deputy Mayor that this is another example of the Council's commitment to the community and the benefits that are provided where they're appropriate. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. No other speakers? Deputy, you wish to close?
Mayor, I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank Jess Nesbitt, the Waste and Environment Officer, for her absolute commitment in not only living the Council's values, but delivering real change in this area. If you're looking for someone who loves their job, loves what they do, and tries to make a positive difference in everything she does in this space, that is her. So thanks for the team's efforts, and in particular Jess, who administers this program.
Thank you for that. And I'll put the motion. Those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any against? That's carried by all. Thank you very much. We move on to 19.1.
Happy to move it, Mayor.
Councillor McKenzie moved, which is the budget amendments 1920. Is there a seconder?
Second that, yeah.
Councillor Harris, is that?
Yep.
Councillor McKenzie, wish to speak to it?
Oh, look, I think it's all fairly self-explanatory in there, Mayor. They're not huge adjustments and they're all well explained by the officers.
Thank you. Councillor Harris?
Nothing further to add to that. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor McKenzie, wish to close?
Aye.
I'll put the motion. Those in favour say aye.
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 Any against? That is carried. 19.2, further budget amendments.
Happy to move that one too, Mayor.
Move Councillor McKenzie.
Happy to second
seconded.
Mayor.
Councillor Harris, thank you.
My
Got a few dogs today.
My dogs are talking, so I've got the speaker on, but just again, briefly, all this is transferring expenditure which is deemed to be capital or was budgeted to be capital, which is now operational, and it's just transferring one between the other. So now I'll turn my mic off.
Thank you. Councillor Harris, anyone further to add?
Nothing further to that.
Any other councillor wish to speak to it? Item 19.2. I'll put the motion. Those in favour say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any against? That is carried by all. Thank you. So we move on to the Community Care and Recovery Venue Ground Hire Fees, 20.1. Someone happy to move that?
Happy to do so.
Councillor Mackenzie moved. Is there a seconder?
Happy to second, Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Mackenzie, wish to speak to it?
Mayor, I'll just comment. I guess really it's just the extension of our community care and recovery package, and I think there was noted a slight deficiency in the original policy, which has now been rectified in this, and I think it's a very sensible thing in the current environment that we're in, so very comfortable to support the motion.
Thank you. Deputy?
Yeah, just that obviously it was the intent under your notice of motion that this would be included, and now this is the formal rectification of that.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Mackenzie, wish to close?
Aye, Mayor.
I will put the motion. Those in favour say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any against? No, the ayes have it. That's carried by all. Thank you very much. We go to 20.2. We do have a speaker for 20.2 or a statement to be read from Bruce Pike.
So Mr Pike says, to the Mayor and Councillors, after reading the various objections to the above proposal, I believe that Council should not act in undue haste and defer any final decision until the matter has been considered in greater depth. Those making the objections have made several valid points that should not be dismissed lightly, and I urge the Council not to be a rubber stamp for any academic agenda that has been foisted onto this city. Yours sincerely, Bruce Pike. Thank you.
Thank you. There's no others?
No.
Thank you. So somebody happy to move a motion on 20.2?
I'm happy to do so, Mayor.
Councillor Mackenzie, as is?
Yes.
Is there a seconder?
Happy to second that, Mayor.
Councillor Finlay, was it?
Yes, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Mackenzie, you wish to speak to it?
Yeah, I do, Mayor. Look, I think that, to be honest, I worry sometimes where people think there are other agendas associated with things that are going on. This has been an ongoing process, the discussion with the university about its transition from Newnham to Inveresk. The concept of parking has been discussed for a long period of time, and there have been a number of alternatives that have been considered through that process. There was a discussion outside of the council's arrangements where the majority of the land under question, which was leased to the Royal National Australia the RNAPS, Royal National Agricultural and Pastoral Society, where there was an agreement made between the University and University of Tasmania and them that their lease would be relinquished to enable them to do further things in relation to their development. Clearly, there are some parking arrangements that currently exist that the council currently administer in the in the roundhouse area, and they have been combined into this project. It's to be noted that this isn't the lease, this is a determination to lease, and the terms of the lease are still being considered in the commerciality of it, and I think that you commented on those somewhere in relation to a question at the beginning of the meeting today. I see this as a use of land which is appropriate. It provides a number of opportunities for use for Launceston residents as well as UTAS, because the car park will be utilised for both purposes. They have undertaken to build the car park and landscape the car park. I note there were comments in relation to to the maintenance and so forth of it, but that'll come up when we deal with the DA and the commercial arrangements. It's actually at this point in time. Currently, I think we get $1 a year in lease payment in relation to the RNAP site. This is going on to a commercial lease arrangement, which is yet to be determined. So my belief is it's actually a good use of the property. It facilitates the use for the stadium as well in days where we have large events at the stadium. I note, obviously, there's a couple of dislocations that have occurred in relation to it, particularly the Tas Breeders Association, and acknowledge the comments that they've made, and also acknowledge the response that UTAS have provided to councillors in relation to the reason why they can't defer the timing of that car park being established, and that's to meet a number of state and Commonwealth funding obligations, not to mention the fact that they're going to be displacing a number of car parks in Willis Street and also on their own site behind the architecture building, and need for piling and so forth like that. So the need to sort of get started on the actual making of the car park is of importance to start as soon as possible. So I believe that sufficient information has been provided. This has been, I guess, publicised in many different ways. Whilst the formal advertisement went through the processes in the newspaper, this is not something that hasn't been in the public scrutiny for quite some time, and anybody who has wished to find out more information about what is actually proposed there has been able to contact the council at any stage, or conversely have a discussion with UTAS in relation to what their plans associated with this block of land were. I note we've still got a DA to approve. I note the commercial application in regards to the rent that's got to be paid by UTAS is yet to be determined, but that's a process that occurs after the decision we make here today. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Finlay?
Thank you, Mayor. I think it's important to acknowledge, particularly in regards to the speaker to this item prior to the moving and the seconding, that this is a decision that's been taken deep into a long-term process with future decisions to be taken from here. But it's important to acknowledge that by supporting the intention to lease this land, by requesting the CEO to enter into this lease arrangement, we are providing the best possible outcome for the precinct and for the university's role in the precinct in terms of reducing the reliance on traffic into the heart of the site by making sure that we're providing for car parking to be on a well accessible, safe entry point through Forster Street. And acknowledging, I was on the street this morning, the roadworks that are happening to improve the traffic flow out of the car park onto Forster Street, now onto the other major arterials. This is the best place for this activity to occur to support both the precinct with the range of activities that happen, whether they be other educational facilities, the cultural activities, the sporting and recreation activities, but also for the university themselves. As Councillor Mackenzie said, there are other future decisions to be taken in terms of appropriate interrogation of the DA when it happens and the commercial agreements in terms of the lease value. But I believe, having read the representations and the responses and considered the impacts of that there is no undue hardship as a result of this decision today. I acknowledge that there are some parties that feel aggrieved as a result of the decision that will be taken today, but I believe there has been reasonable time and there is significant support to provide opportunities to provide solutions to the ongoing concerns. So this has my support today. It's not a quick decision, it's not a short-term decision, it's definitely not a rubber stamp, and I support the motion before us.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Tim Walker.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Cool.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I do wish to speak to this decision today that obviously for many Launceston people, including myself, goes to many issues that have gone on for a number of years. I presume many people here today would have gone to the Launceston show in its days over in Elphin, have gone to the show in its current location. So there's a long saga that's gone on there, which we can't necessarily conflate with this decision today. This has been a decision by the Show Society to relinquish their lease. And on the other side, then we have a long process that's also occurred, which is the university making its decision to move closer to the city, which has also been, quite an elongated process. And the parking has been one of the issues that they have struggled to solve up until this point. The possible other solutions that were mooted would have created far greater havoc for our traffic. They would have involved, less egress to the campus site. So, all in all, this process that's unfolding as we speak is something that sort of ticks a lot of boxes, answers a lot of questions. Putting all that aside, I can understand why some of the people have objected today. There's this space has been used for a number of years. People would like to see that continue. There might not always be suitable alternatives, and that's something hopefully the council can assist with, including potentially finding a new home for the Launceston Show Society. That's an ongoing process as well. That would be a great outcome for the Launceston community to see our show continue. It was sad news to hear that they wouldn't be holding a Launceston show this year because of the current situation we find ourselves in. But let's hope not just for the Show Society, but also for the other pavilion users over the years, that the Launceston Council can assist in providing that continuity. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Daking.
Thank you, Mayor. I too support the recommendation today of the motion. I just want to acknowledge the great work of Councillor Finlay, Councillor McKenzie, our CEO Michael Stretton in regards to their committee that they've had with the university over many, many years now. This is a great location and a great use of the land for the university development. In talking to a number of stakeholders this week and the weeks past, I'd also like to thank Phil Lisson. Phil has articulated in great detail the reasons why the date that they need to get access to the site, and I accept that the university can't delay that date to accommodate any further events in the future. I do know that the CEO has offered support in the past and ongoing support to assist the Show Society and also the Tas Breeders Magic Millions in their journey to find a new suitable location and to have many more successful events in the future. We want to see the show go on. We'd like to see the Magic Millions continue. And we want to see a successful university. I think if we can achieve all those things, we'll have a fantastic city. So that's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor McKenzie, wish to close?
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, look, thanks for the speakers that have spoken today. Look, it's a pretty important part of what we do is making decisions about all sorts of things in our city. I think there are significant things going on in and around the city. UTAS is probably the biggest game in town in regards to what's going on. But this has not been a frivolous or ill-thought-out conversation. This has been one that's been heavily tested in lots of environments, including the public environment, and clearly from a number of the objectives, there's still a number of people who still don't believe they should be leaving Unum, and a number of their comments are in the context of the fact as why are they moving at all. I respect their opinion. It's not the opinion that I have or we as a council have arrived at. The need for appropriate parking arrangements for the university is something central to making any development work appropriately, and the DAs require them to have appropriate parking. There is some displacement and rechanging some of the parking arrangements that Launceston have. I think that this has the opportunity to provide really good parking options for not only the university but for our community for walking to work. And I'm certainly a person who's a great believer in health and well-being, and the walk from there to the city is a beautiful walk along the levee banks or through the Inveresk site, where they can interact with the university as they go through, pop in and have a coffee, pop into the museum as they go through. So there are plenty of opportunities for people to utilise that car park for lots of benefits on and around the site. But today is really just talking about the intent to lease, and I believe that the determination that we should endeavour to move forward with that determination is something that I'll be supporting today.
Thank you, Councillor McKenzie. I'll put the motion. Those in favour say aye.
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 Any against? So all in favour. That is carried unanimously by all present, and that's 10 of us at the moment. So that is carried. We'll now close the meeting. Thank you all very much for your attendance.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Aye.
Thanks, Mayor.
Aye.
Thanks, Matt.